It's in the previous lessons we defined that we'll be using 4 pixels grid. And should it be always 4 pixels actually? Let's find the right answer. By default, Material Design Guidelines recommends you to use 4 pixels grid because it allows you to create absolutely accurate design, and also it's much easier to work with developers. And it gives you huge flexibility, whether you're working on the mobile app, something for tablet, or website. From my personal experience, I would say that it's really amazing to use 4 pixel grid for mobile apps 100%, or when you're designing something for mobile devices where the screen is pretty small, then it's better to use 4 pixels grid. It gives you the full flexibility on your design for spacings, for sizes, for everything. When it comes to web design, the things look a little bit different. Before we jump into web design, let me explain one more thing also here. By default, in most of the tools, the grid is defined by like 10 pixels or by 8 pixels. 8 pixels is one of the most popular grids in the world, actually. Most of the design systems are created based on the 8 pixels grid. It's super comfortable to use, and it also gives flexibility when you are working on projects. It's not so overwhelming as 4 pixels grid, and it's not pretty often when you need to use this 4 pixel spacing somewhere. So that's why 8 pixels covers this problem. So, which means that you can use even 8 pixels grid. But when you need 4 pixels, then your main parameter, like your main spacing between elements, for example, will be 4 pixels. Then for developers or for the design system, you will define it like half of your main size, of the main size that you defined for your grid, which is 8 pixels here. And if you will divide it by 2, then it will be 4 pixels. If you don't want to have these overwhelming lines where everything is like 4 pixels, and sometimes we just don't need it because it's too much, it's too overwhelming to see all these lines. So that's why it's better to use, for example, 8 pixels. And in this case, let's take a look. This is our 4 pixels grid, and we can go with 8 pixels. I'll switch off the rows, and this is our 8 pixels grid. And that's still enough, but as you can see, everything is defined by, we can move, of course, this text on our grid. So now everything is on these lines, on the baseline. Again, here, everything was defined previously as 4 pixels. Now we need to move everything up. And now they're not sitting. So you see, you always have to keep in mind these additional like half sizes. And in this case, this is why I recommend to use 4 pixels grid when you're working on small screens. You can use 8 pixels, but again, 4 pixel grid will give you more flexibility. Now let's jump into web design. In web design, not only web design, when we are working with bigger screens than small device, like monitor, your MacBook, laptop, or when you design something for TV, my recommendation would be to use the grid that is defined by the line height of your text. But if you want more flexibility, which is half of the line height of your main text that you defined for your body text. Here's the example. Here we have text, which is 20 pixels size and 30 pixels or points line height. And for this line height, what I did for this design to differentiate like the spacing, to define the spacing between elements, I created rows of the line height and I increased the opacity of this grid, and I created another grid which is half of the line height. Why I created that? Let me show you here. When I switch this on, all the text that I have here, you see all the lines are on this baseline grid, which is perfect. This is exactly what gives us this professional look from the website. When we are looking at something, when everything is sitting on their lines, this is how we understand that, okay, somebody thought about details and created this particular design, so it looks so perfectly aligned and everything is sitting on its own place, which is great. But here we have another text, which is our headline. If we put our headline on the baseline grid that we defined as the size of our line height, in this case, the distance between the heading and the paragraph is they're sitting too far from each other. And because of that, we miss our proximity, the law of proximity, where objects that are closer to each other perceived as one group. So in this case, they're pretty far from each other. So that's why they're not perceived as one group. How to make it so they will work together? Again, if we will follow just our baseline grid defined as a line height, then we should sit it there or down here. Now, when our headline is on the next line, baseline here, the heading is sitting too close to the text, and in this case they compete with each other. For us, it's a little bit harder to read both of the text because we see everything at once. So what we will do, we will create here our half of the line height grid, and we will put our text 15 pixels, like half of the size of the line height. So now our heading is sitting exactly where we want it to be. So the heading, the spacing between the heading and the paragraph is perfect. It's still considered perceives as one group, and at the same time it gives this professional look because everything is on the baseline, and the baseline here is 15 pixels, and I created 30 pixels so I would see exactly where the lines are sitting. It gives us this visual flexibility, and also in both cases it's visual flexibility, but also it gives functional flexibility. So if we will recap all these things, so should the grid be 4 pixels? Absolutely not. Just a recommendation, if you are creating something for mobile apps, for small devices, 4 pixels grid give you the maximum flexibility. Use 4 pixels. If we are talking about web design, no matter what size of your text you are using, just define, as we already did that before, just define your main, for example, this one, body text. Define the size of your body text, define the line height of your main body text, like in this case 1828, right? I don't know if you see that. Let me bring it here. 1828, which means that our line height is 28, meaning that what we'll do here, we'll set 14 and here 28. So now this is our baseline grid, and now we can define exactly where the text will be sitting, and we will put this one here. We'll give one line between these elements, and here for this text we'll also need to change our, let's change it to H2, for example. This is what we created previously. So now it's not sitting on the grid that we defined. So what we will do, we will just change it so it will be sitting on the grid, and in this case it shouldn't be divisible by 4 anymore because we are working with different grid. It should be divisible by 14 And in this case, we will need to add additional this spacing, remove this spacing here, or to add additional one. Let's see if we can remove. Actually, yes, we can remove to put this text. So, okay, we're already out of it. So we need to add additional space, like up to here. And now the line height is 84, the height is 84, everything is sitting on the grid. We have spacing, enough spacing here. Let's take a look at the text. Now everything is perfect already. And when we need some more flexibility, for example, to move the text closer, we still have it. So it's half of our line height. And now the text is also sitting perfectly. And again, it depends on what you want to highlight more. In the previous example, it perceived as one group, but heading have more white space, which means that it attracts more attention. Remember about visual hierarchy, right? So it attracts more attention. If we want to combine them together into one group, then we will move this text and define the spacing as half of the line height between heading and paragraph. And now everything is sitting perfectly. Everything is defined as one group, and we can work with that. This is exactly what we can give to our developers. So now I hope that you understand that you just need to define your main body text when we are working with web projects. Main body text size, the line height of this main body text, and then your grid will be half of the line height. If you are working with mobile devices, with small devices, then use 8 or 4 pixels grid based on what result you want to achieve. 4 pixel grid will give you more flexibility. And now you understand, should it be 4 pixels? No, and you know why. See you in the next lesson.